said and passed. Considered as read. Thank you. Thank you very much. Wow, thank you. Having so many people in the hall for a basic science talk, fantastic. I just realized that there is a conflict of interest for me for this talk, but please understand that this is to give you another spin on this whole story, right? Here is my new definition for diabetes. I think we need to start pulling away from hyperglycemia as our definition of diabetes and metabolic dysfunction. Uh, you can of course correct me. Arvind is here. Metabolic dysfunction, obesity, and diabetes are a consequence of an inability to optimize energy processing, storage, and utilization. I haven't put my name in there. I will, but think about it. Just reflect on this. Metabolic dysfunction, obesity, and diabetes are the consequence of an inability or disability to optimize energy processing, storage, and utilization. Now let's take this forward, and please stop me if I'm. I'll try to go through this slowly. To understand this, you need to understand that the whole idea of diabetes is the fuel. The fuel, how it is utilized, how it is processed, how it is stored. Why? So the right amount of fuel, the right kind of fuel, and the fuel at the right time is required for us to be, as since Dr. Narsingh Verma is here, to be one with homeostasis. Right? When the right kind of fuel is not there, the right amount of fuel is not there, and it's not taken at the right time, it causes dyshomeostasis. And let's explain this a little further, and then we'll understand why mitochondria become important. Right. Remember, the system is built for scarcity. The system for millions of years, we've not had food readily available. It was seasonal. It was a small amount. It was we ate to live. Now we are the only species in the world that eats and kills for entertainment, right? So when the right amount of food is present, any excess is stored. That's why we have fat. Why do we need? Remember, it's very interesting that we have the largest brain in the population, among all the species. And that's why we also have the largest amount of fat, because the brain is an obligatory glucose user. On the other hand, the heart is an obligatory fat user because glucose is not always available, fat is. Right? Then it needs to be the right kind of food, because I'll talk about it. One of the gifts that your mother has given you is a set of microbiota. When you're born, she gives you that protection that lasts with you for the rest of your life. It's inherited from her mother, her mother, her mother, her mother. We don't know how to process a lot of our food, but our microbiota do. They pre-process that food, and they get you the right kind of food into your system. The third is the right time. The time we eat is as important, because, and as I will show you, that our enzymes are also circadian. Right? I'll talk about these as we go on. So what have we done to the system is, there's an excess amount of food. There's a food that is unfamiliar to your microbiome, and our food intake is circadianly misaligned. And if you look at this, that the increase in the diabetes, increase in cardiovascular events, increase in this thing has all been in the last 50 to 60 years, can be directly attributed to these three. Because we've not been looking at all of these three as a whole, we have been looking at parts of this elephant. But if you look at it, it's a fuel problem. Right? So let me take this to the next level. So when you have, remember again, the system is built for scarcity. When you have excess food, food that is unfamiliar to the microbiome, food that is circadianly misaligned, what happens? Your processing mechanism is overwhelmed. That food has to be processed, right? It has to be converted into energy. There is a factory that is sitting in there. When that processing mechanism is overwhelmed, on one part, the storage is overwhelmed. There's more food that goes into the adipocyte. You heard me talk about adipocyte dysfunction a lot of times. The fat, there's insulin resistance in the fat, there's ectopic fat, there's inflammation. That's one story. The second story is that when the processing mechanism is overwhelmed, the, the cell undergoes dysfunction. We call it endoplasmic reticular stress. It is not able to arrange that proteins correctly. The ATP efficiency comes down. The right amount of energy is not available. The energy is not available at the right time. Therefore, it's like a clock, like one of those children's toys that has a spring. When one part of the spring goes away, a few days the entire toy disintegrates. That's really what's happening to all our bodies with diabetes. It is the cellular dysfunction that causes metabolic dysfunction. It's that metabolic dysfunction that you're calling it as diabetes. You're calling it as diabetes, you're calling it as heart disease, you're calling it all sorts of stuff, but that's metabolic dysfunction. That leads to organ dysfunction. Heart failure, renal failure. Dr. Sahai has just walked in. Heart failure, renal failure, brain failure. Should call it brain failure because there is cognitive dysfunction that occurs in diabetes. So can you see this little pathway? That if you think about anything in diabetes, you can fit it here. We'll call it temporarily, we'll call it the case hypothesis, but this makes sense, doesn't it? Now, guess what process is it? The mitochondria. Why? The mitochondria is the storehouse of the body, right? You take the heart, for instance, 65 grams of ATP is processed in a day for it. Tremendous amount of processing material, right? So this is the mitochondria. I'm sure you've read about it in your medical school, forgotten all about it. But let me show you some interesting stuff that we would not have think about. Again, be grateful to your mothers. I talked to you about one thing that she gave you, right? What? Gut microbiota. Let's talk about the next part. It's this. Interestingly, the sperm is pretty much depleted of mitochondrial DNA. Before there is fertilization, there is no mitochondrial DNA in the sperm. Therefore, except one case in the world, there has been no reported case of paternal inheritance of mitochondrial DNA. These are fantastic processes, very compact. There's a large chain, there's a small chain. They code for specific parts of the respiratory chain where ATP ultimately is produced, right? But they are proximal to the in the mitochondria. They are small fragments that you will see, but also because they are so ubiquitous and they're so important, they can also undergo so many mutations. And in fact, those mutations can be inherited. These are both mitochondrial tDNA mutations. These are also, I won't spend time on it, I can do a whole talk on this, epigenetic mutations where there's methylation, histone acetylation in the mitochondrial DNA. But remember that when you have diabetes, Dr. Yagnik talks about what's happening in the utero, but I'm telling you it's happening before. That you have epigenetically imprinted mitochondria that are being passed on from the mother to the daughter. So you really want to be focusing much before that. So it's also interesting that these don't work alone. Remember, this is a tricyclic acid secretion. These are the mitochondrial DNA, but they have a lot of interaction with the nuclear DNA. So these work together, and changes that occur here are reflected on changes that occur here. Meaning, if there's a problem here at the mitochondrial processing area, that leads to dysfunction in the nucleus, the assembly of the protein, and that is why you're having cellular dysfunction. Direct consequence, right? So, and remember that the mitochondria's biggest function is actually mediated by the nuclear DNA, which is the OXPHOS. Oxidative phosphorylation is the key to all the cellular functions. And that's where you get all the problems. All right, I'm making this a lot more simpler than it looks, right? My idea is for you to get an understanding of this, but don't get, and not to sort of overwhelm you, but I'm happy to answer, or those that I don't know, I'll ask Purvi and Arvind to take. Okay, So this is one part. The second part is to understand how dynamic these mitochondria are. And the way it works is, remember, energy is so precious that these mitochondria learn how to uh, merge or split depending on the energy matrix. And these are mediated by these proteins here. This is a fusion and there's a fission, right? Now, if it is in a dormant state, it just goes into it expands, leaves there. On the other hand, if you require a heavy hitting, these double up, triple up, making greater mitochondrial number. One of the problems that occurs in diabetes is because of the fuel overload, the mitochondria are not able to divide well, and therefore the number of mitochondria come down. The second part of this process is because, remember, I said again, it's like, you're most sensitive, you're most hardworking are the ones that get hurt the most, right? So a lot of these undergo damage. One of the ways that they get rid of the damage is to move away small parts of the damaged into the lysosome. This is called mitophagy. Again, when you overload the mitochondria with fuel, what does it do? It loses its efficiency, right? It's just simple. You go to a passport office, let's say there's one passport or a bank, there's only one bank manager for 500 people. However efficient he is, he's not going to process you. Right? You go to Kumbh Mela, however efficient it is, when 500,000 people want to take bath on Magh Purnima, no administration is going to be able to handle it. Exactly what's happened. What you should think about you is Prayagraj during Kumbh Mela, except that the Kumbh Mela is happening every day because we are overloading our system every day. Right? So this is the autophagy mitophagy sequence. I don't want to get into the details of it, but remember this is a very, very important part of the mitochondrial function. So mitochondrial dysfunction can occur by mutations that occur in the DNA. Second, a problem with the exchange between the mitochondrial DNA and the nuclear DNA. Fission, fusion, mitophagy. Simple? Everybody's with me so far? I'm going to complicate this a little more. Now think about the respiratory cycle. The respiratory cycle is the key to our existence. How many of you remember Arthur Guyton? How many of you read Arthur Guyton, by the way? I'm too old. Yes. So if you read Arthur Guyton, he will say life is only one thing. ATP to ADP and back. Nothing else. There's no life. The purpose of life is ATP to ADP and back. Fantastic, man. Right? So this is the respiratory cycle. Some of these proteins are from the mitochondrial tDNA. Interestingly, this is from the nuclear DNA, but doesn't matter. The first thing that happens is there is a protein, there's a fuel source that comes in. The fuel source, it comes in from the Krebs cycle, the citric acid cycle, the pyruvate and the lactate cycle. It could come from fat, it could come from glucose. I'll come to it in a moment. It comes here. Then this part is reversible. And this causes production of oxygen-free radicals. A small amount of oxygen-free radicals are good. A large amount causes trouble. Right? So one of the things that happens is as this comes, the hydrogen ion starts escaping here. So in exchange for electrons, the protons are moving into the inner cell membrane. This gets transferred from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. At some point of time, there is something called a proton leak. The hydrogen ion comes back inside, and that fuels the conversion of ADP to ATP. And that is what provides energy to the cell to form insulin, to form heart functioning, to form brain functioning. If any function is just this. Right? Now, what can go wrong? We'll come to this in a moment. So this is pyruvate, glucose, tricyclic acid cycle. Similarly, if carnitine acyl palmitate, I'm not going into those details, comes here, fatty acyl coenzyme, tricyclic acid. Very interesting. But do these come together? No. When we eat in the day, glucose is available. It's from glucose. In the night, when the cell has to function, it comes from this. So there's a partitioning of fuels. But what are we doing? We're eating at day and night, and we're actually confusing the mitochondria. causing mitochondrial dysfunction. I'll talk to you about it in a moment. I won't get into the oxygen radical cycle, but this is a rate limiting step. This is the thing. But this mu is the total protein. The cell needs to adapt depending on the demand. But it needs enzymes. If the enzymes are not there, the demand is not going to be met. Lack of efficiency causes diabetes. Lack of governmental efficiency causes Elon Musk. Okay. So let's do this. So remember this, we are the most primitive of all our things is this. It is hardwired for centuries. Light, dark. If you're a daytime liver, light is associated with photosynthesis. Light is associated with food. Night dwellers are different. Night, wake, feeding is gone, sleep is there, and in the dark, mitophagy, autophagy occurs. Why? Exactly like a hotel. You do all the stuff during the day, the cleaning occurs at night. When you sleep, your brain shrinks to a third of its size, and the CSF goes into it and cleans it up. That's really what happens. Right. So fuel partitioning. During the day, glucose. During the night, fatty acids. In rats and others, it's reverse. Even the mitochondria are circadian. The enzymes in the mitochondria are circadian. So this is mitochondrial. They are rhythmic, they are circadian. And interestingly, we talked about gut microbiota. The gut microbiota control so many of our functions. For example, hepatic transcriptomes are controlled by gut microbiota. Our mom doesn't want, she'll keep controlling us for the rest of her life, right? So by two ways. One, the mitochondrial tDNA, and the gut microbiota. So if you think you've escaped your mom's looks, no, she has you sorted out for the rest of her life. The gut microbiota are also circadian. Interestingly, and nobody talked about this before, this is a pancreatic beta cell, and this is glucose-stimulated insulin. Secretion, it requires ATP. This is circadian. So remember the three things I said. Right amount, right kind, and right time. You don't do that, you cause mitochondrial dysfunction. Simple. Diabetes is what? Mitochondrial dysfunction. So this is what happens in diabetes. Glucotoxicity, lipotoxicity causes mitochondrial defects, mutations, fission, fusion, empty DNA causes everything that occurs in diabetes. Beta cell dysfunction, insulin resistance, ectopic fat, inflammation, all blah, 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 blah. Right, what can you do about it? Remember this? The simplest thing you can do is to prevent this. Eat less. Be disciplined. Discipline is any day trumps innovation. Eat what is familiar to your microbiome, meaning if you may like caviar and beefsteak, but your mother didn't, her mother didn't, her mother didn't. Eat, that goes for your wife too, but eat your mother's food. I'm seeing a lot of wives, and be as closely aligned to circadian as possible. Right? You do that, it takes care of almost all of this. But short of that, because we want only pharmaceutical fixes, what can you do? One, imiglamin, right? Imiglamin is the first one that's been talked about as a mitochondrial modulator. What does it do? It actually changes the delivery here. Remember, metformin also works in level 1, in the first respiratory chain. The only it is a mitochondrial modulator, but the problem with metformin, it's a reversible chain. It's an irreversible chain. This is a reversible chain. I'm going to take a few minutes, right? Then it sort of bypasses the first two and goes into level 3. Therefore, increases the efficiency of this. There's sufficient amount of data. I've done enough imiglamin talks, but this is the first mitochondrial modulator we have. But here is an interesting thing that I want you to talk about. How does thiazolidinedione work? How does pioglitazone work? PPAR gamma, right? Yeah. So you read it 10 years ago. This is a new way we know pioglitazone works? It works by slowing down pyruvate entry into the mitochondrial pathway. And the newer group of pioglitazones, the glitazones that are coming, are all going to do this. By slowing down the pyruvate entry, what is it doing? It's giving the mitochondria a little time to breathe. And therefore, it's improving the efficiency of the mitochondria. So, new look at pioglitazone, this is what it's doing. And the next generation of glitazones are going to do this. Lastly, there are a whole bunch of these drugs that are coming that are working at fission, fusion, mitophagy, all of these. But at this point of time, the one drug that we have is imiglamin. So yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, but today is a gift. That's why it's called the present.